In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Members could just take their seats. The Prime Minister on indulgence.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this morning I spoke with President-elect Donald Trump and offered the Australian government's congratulations on his election victory. Mr Trump spoke warmly and admiringly of Australia and reaffirmed that the Australia-American alliance is one of enormous importance to the United States and would always remain so. We also offer, Mr Speaker, our best wishes to Secretary Hillary Clinton for her participation in a very hard-fought campaign. As many Australians have observed over the last 18 months, this was a long and gruelling campaign, certainly by our standards. As President Obama said overnight, campaigns are hard and sometimes contentious and noisy. He added, many Americans are exalted today, a lot of Americans are less so, but that's the nature of campaigns, that's the nature of democracy. And it shows, Mr Speaker, the enduring strength of the democratic system, where the power to choose the government resides with the people. And there has been perhaps no greater demonstration of that process than in the United States. More people voted in this United States election than in 2012, with voter turnout up nearly 5%. That's a very good thing for democracy. It was noticeable that despite an intense and at times very confronting campaign, President-elect Trump immediately reached out to bring Americans together in his victory speech, and in doing so praised and thanked Secretary Clinton for her public service. Mr Speaker, I can assure the House and the Australian people that my government will continue to work closely with the administration of the United States when it is installed in January to advance Australia's national interest, for this is the ultimate role of national leaders, of prime ministers and indeed presidents. I'll ensure we work effectively and constructively with America's 45th president. It's in our nation's mutual interest to maintain the strongest and closest ties between the United States and Australia's Defence Forces, a relationship that has seen American and Australian troops fight side by side in every major conflict in the last century. Indeed, tomorrow, Remembrance Day, we will commemorate the day 98 years ago when the guns fell silent on the Great War, a victory won in no small measure by the brilliance of Australia's General John Monash and the courage of the Australian, British and American troops that he led into battle. Australia has close, indeed intimate, security arrangements with other friends and allies, but our alliance with the United States is unquestionably our single most important security relationship, underpinned by our mutual security pact, the ANZUS Treaty, concluded between Australia, New Zealand and the United States in 1951. Mr Speaker, the ties that bind Australia and the United States are strong, profound. They're based on the experience, on the engagement of millions of Australians and Americans, but above all, they are based on our enduring national interests. Americans know they have no better ally, no better friend than Australia. Above all, our relations are underpinned by the values that we share, a dedication to democracy, freedom and the rule of law. As I've said before, the United States has for decades been the bedrock of regional prosperity and security, so vital to Australia and its partners. The Pax Americana of the last 40 years and beyond has been the basis on which we've seen the most remarkable transformation in economic growth, in living standards, raising billions of people out of poverty in our own region. And that's why my government, and I believe every Australian government, will continue to advocate for a strong, ongoing role for the United States in the Asia-Pacific, Australia will always be America's constructive, solid, committed partner in peace and stability in our region, and will continue to work together to confront the global challenges that face us, whether they be combating Daesh, ISIL and terrorism, supporting security, the maintenance of peace and security in Afghanistan, standing in solidarity against North Korea's missile testing, upholding respect for the rule of law in international affairs. We'll also cooperate closely on trade and investment, with our own free trade agreement with the United States delivering significant benefits to both our nations. I remind the House that in 2015, two-way trade was worth $70.2 billion, up 68% since the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement commenced, while two-way investment was $1.45 trillion. For all these reasons, our nations will continue to be united in our objectives of global stability, security, prosperity. Mr. Speaker, let me take just a moment to acknowledge President Obama and his team, including Vice President Biden, Secretary of State Kerry and Secretary of Defence Carter. We have had a very good relationship with the current administration, one that has seen the strength of the Australia-US alliance, our partnership, continue to grow, to deepen in every respect. It is President Obama has served the world well as the leader of the United States, and he has advanced the common interests of both our nations. We'll continue to work closely with the Obama administration in the transition period between now and the 20th of January. Mr. Speaker, the decision in the United States election has been a great and momentous one, and we wish President-elect Trump and his administration all the best in their work in the future. The fate of the world, the future of the world, depends on strong American global leadership. America has been the bedrock of global stability, of peace in the world, and we look forward to a strong America, a committed America, and Australia will be, as it has been in the past, a strong and committed ally as America stands for peace in the world today.
Questions without notice? Oh, sorry, the Leader of the Opposition in response.
I thank the Prime Minister for the address he's just given. Mr. Speaker, one of the longest and most divisive US election campaigns in living memory has come to a close. And I want to briefly say to the Prime Minister and to all members of this place that as fierce and as hard as we fought this year's election, I believe we can be proud of the standards and relative civility which we held ourselves to. And now, Mr. Speaker, the American people have spoken. They have made their choice. As common believers in democracy, as servants of the people ourselves, we respect their decision. On behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I congratulate President-elect Donald Trump on his victory. Seasoned pundits and pollsters underestimated his electoral appeal and the resonance of his message. And I offer my commiserations to Hillary Clinton. As Secretary of State, as a senator, as First Lady and as an advocate for equality, she served her country with honour. In this campaign and throughout her public life, she has fought with dauntless courage, and the example she set, particularly for women and girls, will live long in the memory of the world. And I hope this House will set aside another time to congratulate President Barack Obama on his dignity, his moral courage and the policy leadership of his administration these past 8 years. Mr. Speaker, every time the people of the United States choose their new president, it has most significant consequences for the world and for Australia. But the partnership that John Curtin and Labor forged with President Roosevelt and the United States in the darkest days of the Second World War was never about personalities. Even then, it was bigger than those two giants who occupied the White House and the Lodge. It is and always will be more than a coalescing of common interests. Ours is a friendship built on shared sacrifice, as the Prime Minister has observed, from the mud of the Western Front to our fight for freedom in the Pacific, from the jungles of Vietnam to the skies and sands of Iraq and Afghanistan. Ours is a partnership between two nations which look at each other and see something of themselves: the frontier and the bush, spacious skies and boundless plains, the fair go and the American dream. And, Mr Speaker, the abiding friendship between our nations is strong enough for honesty. In fact, true friendship demands nothing less. It is never acceptable to mock people for their disability. It is never acceptable to ridicule prisoners of war for their service. When this parliament sees women being disrespected, we have an obligation to speak up. When this parliament sees people being discriminated against because of the colour of their skin or their religion, we have an obligation to speak up. The US alliance does not mean trading away our shared values, it means standing up for them. It doesn't mean changing who we are or what we believe. It doesn't mean selling ourselves short or settling for less. It is our responsibility to be the ally that America needs, not just the ally it wants. We owe that to the United States, and more to the point, we owe it to ourselves, to our character and our qualities as Australians. Mr Speaker, last night the new President-elect promised to bind up the nation's wounds. Those words, of course, come from Lincoln's second inaugural address. So too does Lincoln's famous healing promise to govern with malice towards none, with charity for all. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, for that spirit, for that wisdom, for an America that can heal itself and lead the world.
The Prime Minister on ministerial arrangements.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I inform the House that the Treasurer will be absent from question time today for personal reasons.
Members on my left.
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services will answer questions on his behalf. The Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science will also be absent from question time today for personal reasons, and the Minister for Defence Industry will answer questions on his behalf.
Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. This morning on social media, the member for Hughes said in response to Donald Trump's plan to cancel the Paris Agreement on climate change, and I quote, "Paris is cactus." Is this comment from the member for Hughes consistent with the Prime Minister's announcement today that Australia has ratified the Paris Agreement?
Hear, hear.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government has indeed ratified the Paris Agreement, and Australia is now the 104th country to do so. 196 nations have entered into the Paris Agreement. It has been in force since earlier this month. Mr Speaker, my government is committed to meeting its international obligations under the Paris Agreement. We will beat our 2020 target. We are on track, meet and beat our 2020 target, and we are on track to meet our 2030 target. We are committed to ensuring that Australians' energy is secure, reliable, affordable, and that we meet our international emission reduction obligations. That is our commitment. That is the commitment of the government. It has been made responsibly. It has been made with a full understanding of the costs that are associated and the means to achieve it. The Paris Agreement was an enormous watershed in climate policy. For the first time, all nations made commitments which will enable us to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions and, in doing so, ensure the temperature rises are limited to not exceed 2 degrees Celsius. That is the critical objective of the Paris Agreement. I was proud to enter into that agreement on behalf of Australia. My government is committed to it. We have ratified it. Mr Speaker, ensuring that we maintain energy security, energy affordability and meet emissions reductions, that is not a matter of ideology. It should not be a matter for political game playing, as we've seen from the other side. It is a chance for us to meet our obligations, and we will do so. Unlike the Labor Party, utterly unable to separate its obligations to either provide secure energy, affordable energy or meet emissions reduction. Unable to do any of those, the Labor Party retreats to ideology We focus on the task ahead, and we are getting on with the job.
Member for Goldstein.
The member for Goldstein, thank you very much to those opposite. Thank you. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the US presidential election and what this means for Australia's long-standing strategic partnership with the United States of America?
Members on my left, the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr Speaker, this morning I was able to speak with President-elect Trump, and as I noted earlier, offered him congratulations. Mr Speaker, the
Member for Jagga.
in our discussion we canvassed the importance of a strong American presence in the Asia-Pacific, and I underlined the importance of maintaining that strong American commitment to our region, because it has been the very foundation of the stability, of the peace, the prosperity that has flowed from that over the last 40 years. Mr Speaker, the President-elect described to me his commitment to increasing the investment in America's defence capabilities, and in particular his commitment to expanding the United States Navy of such enormous significance in our region. I described to the President our government's commitment to our naval shipbuilding program, where, notwithstanding, of course, the neglect over 6 years of the honourable members opposite, we have committed to commissioning 54 new naval vessels as part of the largest naval shipbuilding program in our history. We discussed the importance of us continuing to work closely together in our region, and we recognised the importance of our enduring alliance and our enduring defence relationship. We discussed the challenges that we face globally against Daesh. The President-elect described his commitment to eliminating ISIL, eliminating that terrorist scourge, and of course we discussed the way in which we are working together in the Middle East and indeed around the world. Mr Speaker, we discussed the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I observed to the President that Australia regarded the TPP as a very important strategic commitment by the United States to the region, and we continue to encourage the Congress to ratify it. Mr Speaker, it was a very warm discussion, a very frank discussion. The President-elect, of course, is a businessman. He's been a deal maker all his life. He will approach the challenges of his office with pragmatism and with the practicality that comes from a life in business. Mr Speaker, we will continue to work together in the cause of peace and stability. Our enduring national interests will compel that. The alliance between Australia and the United States will always be strong and will, I am sure, become stronger yet in the years ahead.
The member for Wakefield's warned, as is the member for Rankin. I refer members to the remarks I made yesterday and the day before. If they've forgotten them already, I suggest they get a copy of the Hansard. I will not tolerate endless interjections. The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How can the member for Hughes possibly remain the chair of the Coalition Committee on the Environment and Energy when he's promoting a position which undermines the central plank of the Prime Minister's policy on climate change? Will the Prime Minister now sack the member for Hughes from this position, or is the Prime Minister preparing for yet another backflip on climate change policy?
The member for Latrobe will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the honourable member's question seems to overlook a salient fact, which is that the government has today ratified the Paris Agreement. That's the fact. That is the fact. And, Mr Speaker, the significance of that and the importance of that agreement is one which I'll invite the Minister to now address.
Thank you.
No, the member for Port Adelaide will resume his seat. The member for Port Adelaide will resume his seat. What's occurred is perfectly in order. There's extensive practice on it. If he wishes to argue with me, he can do so after question time. The minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, well, as the Prime Minister said, we have ratified the Paris Agreement, which will lead Australia to reduce its emissions by 26 to 28% by 2030 on 2005 levels. And we are doing it with effective policy mechanisms, like the Emissions Reduction Fund, which its cost per tonne of abatement has been at $12.10, our renewable energy target, as well as our National Energy Productivity Plan. But the gall of the member for Port Adelaide, who comes from the state of South Australia, to get up at this dispatch box when he's not worried about the fact that his state went into the black. He's not worried about whether the state went into the black. He's not worried about the state who has the highest electricity prices in the national electricity market. This is what the South Australian Council of Social Services said. We have the highest electricity prices in the nation in South Australia, and we have the highest unemployment in South Australia, and that's no coincidence, Mr. Speaker. The Labor Party should know. The Labor Party should know that it's ideological.
The minister will resume his seat. The member for Port Adelaide has already risen to try and take a point of order. I hope you know which one it is. Can you state it?
Relevance. I asked about the suitability of the member for Hughes as the chair of the Coalition Committee on the Environment.
The member for Port Adelaide will resume his seat. I listened very close. The Minister for Transport and Infrastructure is warned. The minister has the call.
The member for Port Adelaide, in the member for Port Adelaide's own words, wants to kick-start the closure of coal-fired power stations. Now, this will only send electricity prices up and will reintroduce issues about the stability of the system. Now, yesterday we heard from Graham Richardson, and we should remind the House of what he said about the Labor's 50% renewable target. The farce of this policy has become obvious to all. Labor has no plan on how this target would be reached. And then I want to, Mr. Speaker, add the words of Tony Marr, the national president of the CFMEU, who wrote to all the members opposite in 2015, and he said about the Leader of the Opposition's 50% target, and I quote, "An increased renewable energy target of 50% by 2030 will increase the cost of electricity for manufacturing and ordinary households while being a poor tool to reduce Australia's overall global warming emissions." Mr. Speaker, only the coalition can introduce energy efficiency, energy
member's
security,
time has expired. The member for Tangney has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the minister update the House on the importance of working constructively and managing relationships with significant security and economic partners?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Tangney for his question. The Australian government has congratulated President-elect Donald Trump on his victory, and as the Prime Minister has described, he had a very positive discussion with President-elect Trump this morning. The coalition government has been working hard to ensure that we are ready to engage closely with a new Trump administration. Indeed, we have been engaging with members of the Trump teams and with the Republican Party. I have met with senior figures from the Trump transition team, as has Ambassador Hockey and our diplomats in Washington. We are prepared for a Trump administration under the new president because we place the highest priority on a positive relationship with the United States because it is our strategic ally, it is our most important defence and intelligence partner, it is our largest source of foreign investment, and it is our second largest trading partner. It is in our national interest for Australia to have a positive and productive relationship with the new president and with the new Trump administration. But, Mr. Speaker, compare and contrast the behaviour of the Leader of the Opposition the leader of a major political party in Australia, the person who holds himself
the Leader of the
out
Opposition
to
knows
be
the rules on
the
props.
alternative Prime Minister of this country. In his roles, Mr Speaker, he has a responsibility not to damage or undermine our relationships with the United States. And while we were closely
The Leader of the
engaging
Opposition,
on
the Leader of the Opposition
building
has made his point.
relationships with both the Clinton teams and with
There's actually
the Trump
a standing
teams.
order about that,
The
if you'd like me to
Leader
take
of
you
the
through it. The Leader of the Opposition
chose to hurl personal
made his point.
insults at one of the candidates in a presidential election in the United States, describing the president-elect as
Member for
in terms
Lyons
of
will leave under Standing Order
demeaning
94A.
and disgusting, and calling him barking mad. But not content with the personal vitriol, he went even further and denounced the president-elect by saying that he was entirely unsuitable to be the leader of the free world. And then by publicly predicting a Trump loss, he
Members
showed
on my
utter
left.
disregard for the people of the United States and their democratic process. Now, with his mealy-mouthed address today, trying to deflect from the fact that he was undermining the relationship with the United States, he once more showed his flawed judgment and his reckless immaturity. Mr Speaker, he is not fit to lead this country. And
the Minister's time has expired. Members on my left, the member for Barker, the member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, speaking about the US election, the Minister for Foreign Affairs said, and I quote, "I don't expect there to be any change to the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. It hasn't been mentioned." Is the Prime Minister aware that Donald Trump's campaign has actually committed to renegotiating all US free trade agreements? What preparation has the government undertaken in relation to our own free trade agreement with the US? And was it raised in your phone call today?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for a question. Like the Foreign Minister, I do not anticipate any changes to the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement, which is now of some considerable tenure, 10 years old indeed. Mr Speaker, in the discussion with President-elect Trump, we dealt largely with strategic matters that I have mentioned. We did discuss the TPP. We did not discuss the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. And as I said, like the Foreign Minister, I don't anticipate any changes being sought to that agreement. It's one that's manifestly in the interests of both countries. The important thing, I think, to remember, for the honourable member to remember, all honourable members to remember, in fact, is, as I've said earlier today, the relationship between our two nations is based on our enduring national interests, and that is what drives so many of our arrangements. Our ANZUS Treaty, our alliance, is driven by enduring national interests, and they will be the guide for the upcoming Trump administration, just as they have been for the Obama administration and its many predecessors.
The member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture around the dairy support program. Minister, there are over 100 dairy farm families who live in the valleys of the Kiewa, Upper Murray, Mitta, Oven and King Rivers, and up to 60%, it's reported, are in need of assistance and 20% desperate. The government's emergency dairy support package promised a process of fast-tracking household support allowances, but farmers in these valleys are reporting a delay of up to 20 weeks to get assistance. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please commit to holding a round table, preferably in my electorate, to review the process, to increase staff on the ground and to allocate additional resources to clear the backlog?
Minister's concluded. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question and acknowledge the work that she does in making sure that we all do our very best to look after the dairy farmers through this crisis. The Coalition strongly supports Australia's 6,100 dairy farmers, and in so doing has made it our goal to make sure we get a better return through the farm gate. I'm encouraged recently of the recent step up in prices in the dairy industry, and though they're starting from a low base, it shows some promise that things are starting to turn around. The government developed a $579 million dairy support package to assist farmers affected by the decisions of Murray Goulburn and Fonterra to retrospectively reduce farmgate prices. The Coalition's dairy support package has included $555 million in dairy recovery concessional loans with 10-year terms and interest only for 5 years. We had $35.5 million in dairy recovery loans have been approved in Victoria for the 67 farmers in the dairy industry as of the 4th of November, plus a further $9.9 million in offers have been made to a further 17 farmers. Last week I announced that interest rates for dairy farmers who have already taken out these loans, currently at 2.66%, will be falling to 2.07% as of the 1st of February 2017, making it probably the cheapest rates that I can think of in rural Australia. A new round of dairy recovery concessional loans commenced on the 1st of November 2016, and these are at 2.47%. Furthermore, that we note that
the Minister will just resume his seat for a second. The member for Indi on a point of order.
I was just getting to relevance, really. We're asking about round table and more resources to fast-track it.
The member for Indi will resume her seat. The question had a... No, members will not interject while I'm addressing the House. The member for Bendigo will leave under 94A. I listened very carefully to that member for Indi's question. It had a preamble that asked about the dairy support program. The minister's got 3 minutes. He's perfectly in order. There is nothing within the standing orders that says he has to come to a particular part of a long question when a member would wish. The Deputy Prime Minister is completely in order.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've also put $2 million for a milk commodity price index and $20 million towards the McAllister Irrigation District upgrade. There's also $900,000 for Dairy Australia Tactics for Tight Times. What you asked for was a round table, and I've today committed that Senator Bridget McKenzie will conduct a round table in your area, so specifically dealing with the issue that is of concern to you. I might note that the Labor Party, when prices were lower than they are today, back in 2009, offered nothing to dairy farmers, did nothing, and they generally do that because what they do, rather than help a problem, they'll try to exacerbate a problem. And probably the classic area of exacerbating a problem currently is what they're doing in the backpacker tax area, where they can't help it. They can't help it. But when the the former AWU member, who's supposed to be looking after Australian workers, turn around, look here. You don't have to look at your friends. If you don't want to face up to the music, if you're afraid of what you're doing to Australian workers, just keep staring at the member for Sydney. If you can't face the Australian people, yes, then turn your back on them.
Just before I call the member for Groom, it's my pleasure to inform the House that we have present in the chamber this afternoon a delegation from Hungary, led by the President of the Republic, His Excellency Mr János Óder. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you and to your delegation. The member for Groom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the minister update the House on the importance of a strong relationship with the United States?
The Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I take this opportunity to congratulate President-elect Trump on his victory yesterday and to reflect on the fact that Australia's relationship with the United States is underpinned by shared values of democracy, the rule of law, equal opportunity, non-discrimination, freedom of speech, freedom of religion and free enterprise. And these values, Mr Speaker, will continue to define our relationship and ensure that the United States remains a vitally important partner for Australia. And this is certainly true in terms of our trade and investment ties. As the Prime Minister mentioned earlier, last year Australia and the United States celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement. Two-way trade between Australia and the United States has increased from some $41 billion in 2004, the year prior to the US FTA coming into force, to now more than $70 billion in 2015. In fact, in 2004, only 46% of imports from Australia entered the United States tariff-free. Now, thanks to that agreement secured under the Coalition, some 96.1% of imports from Australia enter the United States tariff-free. And further Australian imports enter the US under preferential Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement tariff rates. So on the 10th anniversary of the Australia-US FTA, on the 1st of January 2015, we saw the removal of remaining tariffs on wine, on textiles, surgical materials as well as bedding, which was all removed. Now the Australian-US Free Trade Agreement will continue to deliver benefits for Australian businesses, and by 2023, 98.4% of all US tariff lines will be completely duty-free for Australia. The United States is, of course, our largest source and destination of foreign investment, worth some $1.45 trillion as of 2015, and it's our second largest trading partner as well. And the United States market continues to promise Australian businesses boundless opportunities. We as a government are certainly very committed to building on our strong relationship through a range of initiatives, including complementary Australia-US Business Weeks and the G'day USA programs, and our investment in the relationship is reflected in the recent opening of a Consulate General in Houston and a new investment promotion office in Boston. The fact is, the strength of our relationship with the US will continue, and we see it also reflected in our strong people-to-people links. It was, frankly though, Mr Speaker, passing strange that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition rose just before to question about renegotiated free trade agreements. I mean, it was actually Labor's policy at the last election to tear up any agreements containing ISDS and to renegotiate them. So how utterly bizarre that you would stand and raise a question about a policy which you yourself have adopted.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Foreign Minister. Could the Foreign Minister please advise the House why, in her previous answer, she did not refer to the Deputy Prime Minister describing Donald Trump's political positions as cruel and nasty, did not refer to the Leader of the House describing the advent of the Trump campaign as terrifying, explain why she didn't refer to the Minister of the Environment describing him as a dropkick, or the former Prime Minister John Howard saying he was too unstable to hold that high office, or refer to herself saying he didn't see the US as having a global leadership role.
Members on both sides. The member for Ballarat's warned. I haven't called the minister yet. Members will come to order. The Minister for Foreign Affairs has the call.
I didn't mention the fact that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition called Israel a rogue state and Ariel Sharon a war criminal. I didn't mention the fact that the Leader of the Opposition, who presents himself as the alternate Prime Minister of this country, has chosen to denigrate and demean the presidential candidate in another country. And this sorry tactic of trying to blame everybody else for his personal failings will not wash. He presents himself as the leader of a major political party, and as soon as he's caught out for poor judgment, for reckless immaturity, he seeks to blame everybody else. The people of Australia deserve better from the Leader of the Opposition than trying to blame everybody else for his personal failings. This was not some boozy meeting of union bobber boys hurling insults. This was about protecting our national interests. And the Leader of the Opposition has shown that he's not up to the job. He is out of his depth. Member for Grayndler, he's seriously out of his depth.
Member for Sydney. The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the minister update the House on any recent announcements regarding the development of Australia's defence industry? What implications do these announcements have for the alliance with the United States of America?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for North Sydney for his question. Mr Speaker, our relationship with the United States in terms of defence is unsurpassed by any other country in the world. Our interoperability with the United States Defence Forces, our use of their combat systems integrated into our platforms, our cooperation and collaboration on major projects is our most important relationship in the world. And just this week it was reconfirmed by Australia winning the right to be the maintenance and sustainment hub in the Asia-Pacific for componentry of the Joint Strike Fighter, Mr Speaker. And the reason the member for North Sydney in fact asked the question is because one of the businesses in his electorate, Rockwell Collins, will be one of the major providers of navigation systems and countermeasures for incoming weaponry for the Joint Strike Fighter program for the entire Asia-Pacific region. And in fact, the Minister for Human Services, the member for Aston, also will have a firm in his business in his electorate called RUAG, who will do the landing gear for the Joint Strike Fighter program. This builds, Mr Speaker, on the success of the Joint Strike Fighter program in becoming the maintenance and sustainment hub for engines for the entire Asia-Pacific area and for frames for the southern Asia-Pacific region. This was an international competition. The UK, the Netherlands, the US and Australia were the 4 countries chosen to maintain and sustain the Joint Strike Fighters all around the world. And there will be 3,000 Joint Strike Fighters all around the world, Mr Speaker. Already, 30 businesses in Australia are doing $800 million worth of business in supplying to the Joint Strike Fighter program components of this particular platform. So this week's announcement on Tuesday is a very timely reminder, Mr Speaker, of the importance of our defence relationship with the United States. And it builds on many other things. I was in Washington a few weeks ago to talk to them about the Joint Strike Fighter program. We could not have a better friend than we do in the United States, and they feel the same way about us. And any of our colleagues who travel to Washington would obviously know that. And that's why, Mr Speaker, it is critically important not to put those kinds of relationships at risk by having bad judgment. By having bad judgment, Mr Speaker. It was poor judgment of the Leader of the Opposition to refer to President Trump in the way that he did, to personally denigrate President Trump. It builds on the poor judgment he showed in saying that he would not tell the Navy whether they should or shouldn't take their vessels within 12 nautical miles of disputed territory, Mr Speaker. Poor judgment. It was poor judgment when he hung on to Senator Sam Dastyari in spite of the fact he clearly should not have been staying on the Labor Party front bench. And it was poor judgment that led him to put Kimberley Kitching into the Senate, Mr Speaker. It's time his colleagues
has expired. The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Liberal Party's delegate to the United Nations, Senator Cory Bernardi, has lauded the election of Donald Trump as a movement against the establishment political parties. Is the Prime Minister concerned by the movement against establishment political parties, particularly by conservative groups based in South Australia? And what implications does this have for government policy?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member is very familiar with the loss of manufacturing jobs in South Australia. After all, his party has contributed so much to the loss of those jobs. After all, it was the Labor Party that in 6 years did not commission one single naval
Member
vessel.
for Sydney is warned.
It was the Labor government. 6 years. 6 years in government.
The member for Sydney has been warned
that our submarines needed to be replaced, recognising that our Navy needed new vessels, recognising that work needed to be done, unwilling, unable to make a decision, and left thousands of workers in South Australia to face that valley of death as the existing work tails off. We have commissioned, or are commissioning, 54 new naval vessels. What did Labor do? Nothing. Is shipbuilding important in South Australia? I think it is. I think South Australians know, and they know, that it was the Labor Party that abandoned them. And what about the Labor Party's brilliant management of the energy supply in South Australia? You know, we need to have reliable, affordable power. Yes, we need to cut our emissions, and we will do so. We are doing so. But you have to be able to keep the lights on. You've got to be able to keep the wheels of industry turning. The Labor Party abandoned the workers in those businesses. The Labor Party's energy present to South Australia is the least reliable and the most expensive wholesale energy in the country. Nobody has less moral right to talk about workers' jobs, manufacturing industry than Labor members from South Australia. You abandoned the workers of South Australia. You abandoned the workers at Osborne. It was the Liberal parties, the national parties, our coalition, which has given them hope for an advanced manufacturing future. We did that. We are building up an advanced manufacturing base in South Australia. The Labor Party abandoned South Australia. They abandoned those workers and they abandoned those jobs.
The member for Leichhardt.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Defence Personnel. Will the Minister update the House on how Australia's Defence Force personnel are helping to build deeper ties with the United States?
The Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for his question and note his long and continued interest in the strong and binding ties between Australia and the US. As a former member of the RAAF, he knows the value of our strong relationship with that country. Indeed, the defence relationship between Australia and the US is the strongest in the world, spanning across conflicts and crisis to work towards shared common values and interests. This commitment is reinforced by the fact there are still 190 American MIAs in our country. It's reinforced by the fact there is a World War II RAAF pilot officer, Francis Milne, buried in Arlington National Cemetery. He is one of only a few foreigners buried among the 400,000 American men and women in the United States National Memorial. Today, in terms of our defence people-to-people links, there is no relationship more important to our Defence Force personnel. Our exchange program is central to this. The number of Australian defence personnel who are exchanged, embedded or posted for training in the US represents the largest number of postings outside Australia. These postings help build and maintain strong working relationships and improve interoperability with the United States Army, Marine Corps, Navy and Air Force. There are approximately 450 Australians in liaison and exchange positions in the US, including in geographic combatant commands. There are approximately 200 US personnel in Australia, in addition to the over 1,000 US Marines rotating through the Northern Territory. At Pacific Command, the Honolulu-based US military operations with responsibility for the strategically important Asia and Pacific areas, embedded Australian personnel are also making a meaningful contribution to our security. I've recently had the privilege to see firsthand the excellent work they are doing and the positive influence it has on our relationship with the US. Our ties to the United States through our strong military and defence cooperation span across conflicts and governments. It is an incredibly important part of our defence engagement with our region, but it is equally important to the Australians and Americans who benefit from this international exchange. Mr Speaker, This government is committed to that relationship, our strongest defence relationship, as are our defence personnel.
The member for Wakefield.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This morning, when asked about the policies the government has put in place that saw auto jobs lost in South Australia, the Deputy Prime Minister said, and I quote, "There are not many car plants in National Party seats. Who are we looking after? Our people." Why should South Australian workers trust the Prime Minister with their jobs when his own deputy admits he doesn't care? Isn't it a case that the divisions in this government mean the Prime Minister is only focused on one job, your own?
Prime Minister has the call. Members on both sides. Member for Hunter.
Mr Speaker, Mr Speaker,
member for Deakin.
Mr Speaker, it is remarkable to have another South Australian member giving us the opportunity to talk about the way the Labor Party abandoned the workers in South Australia.
Member for Wakefield.
To talk about the way in which the Labor Party abandoned the most advanced manufacturing projects in South Australia. Defence industries are at the very cutting edge of technology. They are at the very cutting edge of technology. It is the most advanced manufacturing. And everyone understands this except for the Labor Party. What did they do in—
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Wakefield is rising on a point of order. I need to point out to him first he's lucky to be rising on a point of order, given he's been interjecting through the answer and he's been warned. I'll hear his point of order, and then I won't hear him again for the rest of the answer. The member for Wakefield.
Well, thank you.
The point of order
is on relevance. I was talking about the car industry. The Prime Minister seems unable to be able to talk about that.
Resume his seat. The Prime Minister is in order.
Thank you.
Prime Minister is in order.
Thank you. Thank you. The honourable member is very well aware of the decisions taken by international car makers during the time of the Labor government. What about Mitsubishi? What about Ford? We understand that. The reality is that Australia's greatest opportunity is in advanced manufacturing. The reality is that the most advanced manufacturing is in the defence sector. The reality is that it was the Labor Party that abandoned the workers at Osborne, that abandoned the defence industry. 6 years and nothing was done. Couldn't even make a decision. A failure. I hear from the honourable member who had a ministerial role in those days before his negative gearing incident. He will remember very well. Nothing done. It was
Member
a
for
perfect
Batman.
zero. How many ships did the Labor Party commission in 6 years? None. Very simple number to remember. Absolutely nothing done. And what that meant was the abandonment of those workers, the abandonment of those skills. And the challenge that the Minister for Defence Industry has now, of course, is to maintain the workforce as it is in Osborne and to build up those skills to prepare to build 9 future frigates, 12 offshore patrol vessels, 12 future submarines. This is an enormous project, so much of it being done in South Australia, and we hear the hypocrisy from Labor Party members whose own party abandoned their state. We are standing up for advanced manufacturing, for jobs in advanced manufacturing, for our defence industry, securing Australia with the capabilities the ADF needs and securing our future economy with the skills we need, with the technology we need for a prosperous nation in the 21st century.
I just want to, particularly on interjections, caution the second Deputy Speaker for obvious reasons. The member for Petrie has the call.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services, representing the Treasurer. Will the Minister please update the House on the importance of the strength of Australia's long and prosperous economic relationship with the United States of America.
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services, the member for Whitlam and the member for Barton will cease interjecting. The Minister has the call.
Thank you to the member for Petrie. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate President-elect Trump. The Australian government looks forward to working productively and constructively with his administration. Australians, as everyone knows, have a very strong and special, enduring relationship with the United States. It is underpinned by our shared values of democracy, of freedom and of enterprise. And Australia has no stronger economic relationship than our long-standing economic relationship with the United States of America. The United States is the world's largest economy, with their GDP estimated at around $17.4 trillion. That's about 22.5% of the world's global domestic product. The United States is and will continue to be a major driver of the economy. And for Australia, the United States is our largest direct foreign investor. It is our largest two-way investment partner, with a two-way investment stock reaching over $1.45 trillion in December of 2015, and is Australia's second-largest two-way trading partner in goods and services at $70.2 trillion. This trade relationship was turbocharged after the Howard government secured the Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement, which was entered into on the 1st of January 2005. Upon entry into force, more than 97% of Australia's non-agricultural exports into the United States, excluding textiles and clothing, became duty-free, and 2/3 of agricultural tariff lines went to zero. Significantly, Australia and the United States continue to work closely together through multiple trade and economic fora, the G20, the World Trade Organisation and the Apex Forum. The enduring national interests of Australia and the United States will ensure that our economic relationship will continue to be very strong well into the future.
The member for Oxley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Speaking about the US election this morning, Senator Ian McDonald said about Queenslanders at the last election, and I quote, "They also thought in Tony Abbott they had someone they could relate to."
The member for Oxley will resume his seat. I know it doesn't. The member for McEwen will resume his seat. I'll just ask the member for Oxley to repeat his question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Speaking about the US election this morning, Senator Ian McDonald said about Queenslanders at the last election, and I quote, "They also thought that in the member for Warringah they had someone they could relate to, and I think all those things did impact upon the result and did lead to a bigger than expected vote for Pauline Hanson." Unquote. Does the Prime Minister think Queenslanders relate to the member for Warringah in a way they don't relate to the current Prime Minister and his governments?
Members on my right, having heard the question and understanding the context of it now, I would have allowed the original question. The Prime Minister has the call. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are so many talented election commentators in the gallery above us. I will leave those analyses to them. The fact is the matter, as the honourable member may have dawned on the honourable member, is that the result of the election was we won and you lost.
Members on my right, the member for Bowman, the member for Deakin, the member for Dawson has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the minister update the House on the importance of cooperation with the United States on border security, particularly in the wake of the stunning election of the courageous Donald J. Trump as President of the USA?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I also say, pass on my congratulations following his election to the Brisbane City Council. Lord Mayor Graham Quirk up in the gallery today. Great Australian. Good to see you here, Lord Mayor. And for all of those people interested in the relationship between the US and Australia, please visit the MacArthur Museum in Brisbane. A great opportunity to explore the rich history between our two great nations. Mr Speaker, the friendship that we have endured over many decades between our two countries is well documented during times of war and peace. We share many of the same values, we celebrate each other's cultures, and our governments and societies share many foundational beliefs and institutions. Australia has a proud history of close cooperation with the United States, and I was very pleased in February of this year to be in Washington, D.C., where I met with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, a very integral part of the Obama administration, and I want to recognise the work that he has done as part of President Obama's national security team. It is a very close relationship that we have, not just in terms of the defence relationships, but also the links between our border protection agencies. There is a ready exchange of information on a daily basis with the millions of movements across our respective borders, and we do have a great level of cooperation, and I pay tribute to Jay Johnson, and I look forward very much to establishing close cooperation with the incoming Secretary of Homeland Security in the Trump administration. The government works with the US through multilateral fora such as the Five-Country Conference and Border 5, B5. We also share risk profiles with the US Department of Homeland Security to enhance the integrity of our visa program and inform customs targeting. Mr Speaker, I'm sure that all Australians will be pleased to know that in Operation Angel Watch, it allows us to share data with the United States to identify and reject registered sex offenders who apply for Australian visas. So the very practical impact of this very important relationship is felt and understood by all Australians. Now, Mr Speaker, Australia gets particular value from the secure real-time platform by which immigration information is exchanged between partners on the basis of biometric or fingerprint query. Through this program, we have identified several known or suspect terrorist matches, identity discrepancies and records of immigration offences. I want to say a particular thank you to the US authorities for the work that they've done with us in scrutinising each application of the 12,000 people that we announced we would bring in from Syria. It has allowed us to identify over 20 people that are of interest to us, are of interest to our intelligence and security agencies, and because of the close working cooperation, which will continue for decades to come, we keep Australians safe.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Attorney-General's humiliating backflip on the Legal Services Direction just before question time. Given this backflip follows the Attorney-General's litany of scandals, including repeatedly misleading the Parliament, appointing over a dozen Liberal cronies to jobs worth up to $370,000 a year, and claiming people have the right to be bigots. What does the Attorney-General have to do to be sacked?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if there's anything in the standing orders about unhealthy obsessions or stalking, but the member for Isaac's enduring interest in the Attorney-General is one that it reaches a pinnacle. I've seen a lot of envy and enmity between senior members of the bar. I've never seen anything quite at this level. He asks about the Legal Services Direction. The Attorney-General has withdrawn it. There will be a new Solicitor-General appointed shortly, and he will consult with the new Solicitor-General on the new directive in due course.
The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Justice and Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Counterterrorism. Will the Minister update the House on Australia's counter-terrorism and law enforcement cooperation with the United States? Why is this cooperation vital in keeping our country safe and secure?
The Minister for Justice.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Robertson for that question and the interest she takes in law enforcement matters here in Australia. Now, as has been noted by other speakers today, the friendship between the United States and Australia is very long-standing. Our alliance is founded on shared values, and of course, very importantly, it's founded on practical cooperation as well. And that collaboration has never been more important in an era of a decreasing national security environment and an increase in the terror threats that both countries face. Now, just as we have worked diligently to deal with the terror threat here at home, a vital part of our response has been to work collaboratively with our international partners on doing everything we can to shape the global response. And Australia has a range of arrangements in place that bring together our law enforcement, intelligence communities and other partners to help us deal with the terror threat. Australia and the United States have for many years worked closely on this cooperation, and we greatly value our counter-terrorism and intelligence relationships. Since the devastating attacks in New York on 9/11, Australia and the United States have continued to work side by side to destroy terror at its source in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, and also to seek out and disrupt terrorist networks in our own countries and in the wider world also. This cooperation covers a wide array of efforts, including information sharing and close operational coordination. In Southeast Asia, a region that is so vital to Australia's national security, our American partners look to us to lead the counter-terrorism efforts, and we do it exceptionally well, and I congratulate our agencies for the strong relationships that they've managed to build in the region. In addition, this government has enabled the Australian Federal Police to expand and deepen our partnership with US law enforcement agencies to help tackle the threat to Australia of organised crime, specifically gun smuggling, drug smuggling, outlaw motorcycle gangs, money laundering and cybercrime. The AFP in America plays a significant role in the exchange of criminal intelligence with partners including the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Centre and the US Departments of Justice and Homeland Security. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission has deployed analysts to fight cybercrime and money laundering through the Drug Enforcement Administration and to the United States Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. In addition, AUSTRAC, our financial intelligence agency, works closely with the US Internal Revenue Service on regulation, strategic and operational intelligence. It is paramount that Australia and America continue this close cooperation. I congratulate the Foreign Minister and Ambassador Joe Hockey and our other diplomats for the work that they did with both President-elect Trump's campaign and Secretary Clinton's campaign to make sure that Australia's interests were going to be protected regardless of what the election result has achieved. And I look forward to our enduring law enforcement cooperation continuing under the Trump administration.
The member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Minister representing the Minister for Education has repeatedly claimed that the $1.84 million grant to a college linked to Bob Day went through the normal processes. Can the Prime Minister provide any other example where a college was awarded an amount which exceeded their entire annual revenue?
The member for Adelaide will just take a seat for a second. The Minister for Urban Infrastructure was interjecting through that answer and prevented me hearing the questions, so we're now going to hear the whole thing again.
A noisy kettle. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Minister representing the Minister for Education has repeatedly claimed that the $1.84 million grant to a college linked to Bob Day went through the normal processes. Can the Prime Minister provide any other example where a college was awarded an amount which exceeded their entire annual revenue? And will the Prime Minister now admit that this grant was excessive?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I can give an example. The Campbelltown Junior Soccer Club in my electorate.
The member for Page.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on what efforts the government is making to ensure a strong labour supply for Australia's fruit and vegetable growers to ensure summer fruits can get to market? And is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and
a lot of work went into making sure that we came up with a tax level instead of the 32.5%, which was really instigated back in the Labor Party days and confirmed by the AAT, that if we had a 19% tax, then the average take-home pay for Australian working holiday makers would be around about $14.34 an hour. This compares with $13.79 an hour in New Zealand under a backpacker scheme and under $13.39 under a Canadian backpacker scheme. After we did this, Mr Speaker, we discussed it and it was agreed both by the NFF, the New South Wales Farmers, the Northern Territory Farmers Association, the QFF, the Pear Growers Association of South Australia, the VFF. It became an eminently sensible proposal to pursue. That position has also been endorsed by the Senate Economics Legislation Committee, which also found that the committee recommends that this rate be passed. But there was a group that decided that it wasn't the rate they wanted, and that was Senator Jackie Lambie, who became the leading economic light of the Australian Labor Party. And she proposed a different rate, a rate of 10.5%. Now, the problem with 10.5% is this doesn't create fairness, it creates a mechanism to attract foreign workers into Australia to take Australian jobs. And it seems awfully strange when the member for Maribyrnong, the former AWU leader, has come up with a reason to put Australian workers out of work and replace them with foreign workers. It was rather remarkable the lengths of the lengths he will go to create a political storm, to throw rubbish basically on the Australian agricultural industry, to create dissent, to create hurt for the purpose of political intrigue. And if it's really his belief that he should have a 10.5% tax rate, then why didn't he propose it at the election? Because he had no intention of proposing a rate like that, because the rate he proposed the election was 32.5%, and that rate was booked by the Treasurer. So now we have the Australian Labor Party having basically letting their workers go, creating an advantage for foreign workers, putting Australian workers out of a job, and they do it for nothing more than political intrigue. And he sits there smiling like a Cheshire cat. He thinks this is funny. It's just as funny as it was with the Chiquita mushroom workers, just as funny as it was with Cleanavent. This is what he thinks about the Australian working man and woman. This is what he's doing to the Australian working man and woman on the farm. He doesn't care about them. All he cares about is the political intrigue and creating dissent and creating discord. It is an absolute disgrace what the Labor Party has done to the backpackers.
Minister's time has expired. The Prime Minister has the
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Thank the Prime Minister. To the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I wish to add to an answer the $35.5 million in dairy recovery concessional loans asked by the member for Indi. Loans for 67 farmers have been approved across the participating states: Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, New South Wales, as at the 4th of November. In Victoria alone, $28.4 million in dairy recovery concessional loans benefiting 58 farmers have been approved as of the 4th of November 2016. As I indicated in my answer, a further $9.9 million in loans offers have been made to 17 farmers, all of these in Victoria.
The member for Hunter is going to ask a question of me, apparently. The member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I remind you that during 2014 I asked a question of the Minister for Agriculture about drought relief, and he provided an answer, but subsequently changed the Hansard to that answer.
Oh, no, the member.
No, please hear me out, Mr.
I'll hear
Speaker.
the member for Hunter. Yeah.
While the minister corrected the Hansard, and needed to do so because he needed to correct an answer for very good reason, he's never come back to the House as the minister and corrected the misleading of the House. And I ask you whether it's now appropriate that he do so.
Well, the member for Hunter knows two things. If he wishes to raise those sorts of matters, he has numbers of opportunities to raise them during the House, or to write to me, or to anyone, or to any other authority. My recollection is that when I was a humble backbencher, this was raised with the Speaker at the time. That's my recollection, and it's certainly something I know that is dear to the member for Hunter's heart, because I have it bellowing into my left ear through interjections most question times. But if I have anything to say about the matter, I'll let the member for Hunter know if I do, and then I'd let the House know. The Leader of the House with papers.